The Holy Gospel according to Mark, the 4th chapter. On that day, when evening had come, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion, and they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. You may be seated. Real quick, when you hear that gospel lesson, what do you hear? Just for a moment, think about what is it, what's the word for you? Got it? I'm going to make a wild guess. It's going to go something like this. If you just believe in Jesus, everything will be okay. How close was I? Kinda in the ballpark. So that suggests that we probably all know what the sermon ought to be today, right? It goes something like this. The pastor gets up, identifies some of the things that are going on in the lives of people in the congregation and the community, the ways that there are some difficulties and things going on, names those things that are going on to be the storms in our lives, and then walks through this story from the gospel reading and says, now, if you just believe in Jesus, if you just have faith, everything's going to be okay. And if that's the sermon outline, then we all know it, and I can just sit down, y'all can fill in the blanks. Some of you know better. I'm not going to do it. Here's why. Frankly, that is a great sermon. And it's wonderful. At the same time, there are so many people who have deep and abiding faith in Jesus Christ, who live that faith in every way that they possibly know how, and, you know, it just doesn't seem to get okay for them. Some of them, their relationships are kind of messy. And no matter how much they trust in Jesus, it doesn't seem to clean up the messiness of those relationships. Sometimes those relationships even just kind of blow up. For others, it may be health concerns. And no matter how much they trust in Jesus Christ, it doesn't seem to fix the issues. And they have to live with a sense that somehow maybe Jesus has stayed asleep in the back of the boat. And so to offer that sermon in many ways just isn't helpful for folks who live in that reality. Diana Butler Bass calls that the belief gap, right? Where the reality of what the faith community tries to tell us and our reality doesn't match up, and we somehow fall into something in the middle of that. And when we fall into the drink, if you will, and then all of a sudden we have a decision. How do we get out of this? How do we get out? Do we get back on the path, back on the way that got us to where we are and we fell into the drink in the first place? Or do we try to find a new way? So I'm going to suggest that one thing that we can do today is maybe we can hear this story just a little differently. Maybe you've already thought about it this way. Maybe you've already spent time wrestling with it in this way. If so, maybe you can just help me out a little bit. So let's start at the beginning. The story tells us that on that same day, Jesus had been teaching. There were crowds. On that same day, it was evening. Now, what we know about the evening is that in the ancient world, when it got dark out, it got dangerous. You didn't go out in the dark unless you absolutely had to. You didn't, after dark came, you didn't open up your door to whoever might come to the door unless you were really confident that it was somebody that you knew. The dark is a dangerous place. The dark is a place where bad things can happen. So, in the evening, Jesus tells his disciples to get in the boat and cross the lake, cross the sea. Now, in the ancient world, the sea is where the chaos monsters live. The sea is where you can meet your peril. The sea is the place where you can get in big trouble. It's dangerous. People do not go out onto the sea. And that particular sea is one that is notorious for storms that kind of whip up out of nowhere and you have no clue that they're coming. In the evening, Jesus tells his disciples to get in the boat and go to the other side. Who's on the other side? Foreigners. People who aren't like us. And what do we know about people who are not like us? Well, our gut tells us they're dangerous, right? If they're not like us, then they're dangerous. And so we have the trifecta of danger right here in about the first verse of this lesson. At a dangerous time of day, Jesus tells his disciples to use a dangerous mode of transportation to go to a dangerous place. Now, if you're one of those disciples and you're getting into one of those boats, and by the way, did you hear it? In this telling of the story, it's not just one boat, but there are several boats out there. If you were one of those disciples, how would you be feeling just about now? Would you be laughing like the kids? In fact, fear would start to grip you. It can get a hold of you, and what we know about when fear gets a hold of us like that, it's hard to think in a lot of other ways. Right? So, just from hearing the story, just from hearing that opening of the story, we already know kind of how this is going to go. So they get out on the lake, this dangerous place at a dangerous time of day in a dangerous mode of transportation, heading to a dangerous place, and a storm comes. And when the storm comes, the anxiety goes through the roof. Or maybe it goes through the floor of the boat and water starts coming in. However you want to think about it. The anxiety goes sky high. And those disciples get really, really anxious. And they say, Lord, don't you care? Don't you care that we are perishing? Now, another thing to know about the ancient world, as opposed to our world. In the English language, when we think of faith, it's a noun. What we know, little grammar lesson, right? Nouns are persons, places, or things, right? It's an object. It's maybe a concept. It doesn't move. But in the ancient world, and the word that gets translated faith in our translations, that word is a verb. It has direction. It calls us to be oriented in very particular ways. And so when Jesus says to his disciples, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" What he's basically asking is, have you not oriented yourselves to me? Have you not oriented yourselves to the reign of God that I am declaring to you, to the reign of God that I have been demonstrating for you all of this time? This reign of God that I have taught you about. It's about direction. It's about orientation. It's about movement. And so it's important for us to remember that faith is a verb. And what Jesus does with his disciples is he calls his disciples to cross over to the other side, to go to that other place, to walk that walk with him. Now, this is a little preview of things to come, and the first story is a story that we're actually going to skip over. You won't hear it on Sunday morning, and then I'm going to give you a preview of what you're going to hear next week. So, preview of things to come. All right? What happens when they get to the other side? They get to the land of the Gerasenes, and there is this man over there. And he is possessed by an unclean spirit. He is so possessed, in fact, that the community has had to shove him out beyond the boundaries. He is so possessed, in fact, that they couldn't hold him down with chains. He would break free from them. He is so possessed that he is doing self-mutilation and beating up on himself and doing self-harm and injury. He is so possessed, in fact, that he has to live among the dead. And when the community pushes him out to that kind of a space, what we know is he is as good as dead socially. He has no place in community. Jesus invites his disciples. He invites you and me to go to those kinds of places, go to those people, and bring the reign of God to bear in their presence. Calls us to be the reign of God, God's love, God's forgiveness, God's presence, God's life. And then, after that incident, and you know how this goes, right? This unclean spirit gets cast out into the pigs, and they run down into the lake. And the crowd comes out from town, and they say, "Get out of here, Jesus." They were so thankful for the work he was doing in their midst, bringing the reign of God into their midst. Now, there's a reason for people to be scared, disciples, right? They send Jesus packing. And so they get in the boat and they cross over to the other side. And what's the other side this time? It's right where they started out. And who do they meet? They meet a temple authority, a Jewish leader, a guy by the name of Jairus, and his daughter is dying. And so Jesus goes to there, and on his way comes across a woman who has had a flow of blood for many, many years and has given up everything. And in both of those instances, we have people who are, first in the case of the woman, is ritually unclean, is cast out of the worshiping community, if you will, because of her circumstances. She's ritually dead. 7 years. And then we have this girl who is actually dead. Jesus crosses those boundaries. Jesus goes to the margins, and he invites his disciples to go with him on a dangerous task in a dangerous place by a dangerous means at a dangerous time of day. Paul's letter to the Romans today, or the Corinthians, it details pretty clearly that being a disciple of Jesus Christ, being a follower of Jesus, is not a picnic. It's not always about being comfortable. Jesus invites us to get into the boat and go with him, to cross over to those margins. And when Jesus says, "Have you still no faith?" he's not asking us whether we are adhering to doctrinal purity. He is asking whether we have committed ourselves to a relationship with him and with God, a relationship that brings life for us, but then propels us to cross over those same kinds of boundaries, to go to those margins, to go to people who are out there who don't have a sense of God's presence, and to bring that presence to them so that they might know life. And so the truth of the matter is, in the midst of it, Jesus isn't promising that everything is going to be okay in the end. What he's doing is he's inviting us to join him on the journey, and that journey invites others and others and others to come and be with him as well, to experience the life that we have. But we know the rest of the story, what those disciples did not know. We know that it was Jesus who went to the cross and experienced an excruciating death, who was indeed buried and went to the dead, and on the third day was raised to new life. So what we have is we have the promise that indeed, there is going to be messiness in life. There is going to be all of that, and sometimes it's going to seem like there's no way out. It's going to seem like Jesus is staying asleep at the back of the boat. But what we know also is that indeed, in the very end, when it's all said and done, it does work out in the end. Everything will be okay in the end. And so we can go to the margins, and we can be the light of Christ.